What is news this morning is what's happening in Ukraine. So a big update. There are a lot of moving pieces over the weekend, and we want to bring you up to speed on that. So I think one of the big stories, of course, is that Vladomir Zelensky, the Ukrainian prime minister, has been calling for additional support from NATO once again, and saying that he really wants to join NATO, and went in front of the Israeli Knesset over the weekend as well to demand that Israel step in and help. Also, this morning, we've learned that Zelensky has now banned 11 opposition parties, 11 different opposition political parties. And by the way, a huge percentage of these parties represent ethnic Russians in the country. About 17% represent ethnic Russians in the country. And so 11 different opposition parties. He's also now nationalized all television stations in the name of fighting misinformation. So,
which is something when he was elected in 2019, he said he would not do, that he absolutely would not ever take control of state-run media or ban opposition media. So you could make the argument, well, these are extreme times. He's trying to protect his country from invasion. But it's very hard to make that argument when it is not at all clear how many people actually are supportive of Russia in that nation and how many people are not. We can see on the map when we watch broadcast news, these sort of red areas that are now controlled by Russia or are being called pro-Russia. But do we think that people actually exist cleanly inside of those borders? No. Clearly, that's not the case.
No, and David Frum tweeted this almost like with a straight face. I mean, he's a liberal writer at The Atlantic. I mean, I just love this. Ukraine may be the first example in human history of a country that, under the pressure of war, is becoming more tolerant and more liberal.
What?
Like, yeah. People were quick to say, David, are you like smoking crack here? Like, do you not know what the heck is actually happening in this country? You write for The Atlantic. Did you not see what this guy just did? And look, you say, yes, they're being invaded. Yes, by Russians. Absolutely, that's the case. But these are things you do internally. Like, this is what you're doing inside of your own country.
Right.
Banning 11 opposition parties, also nationalizing all television outlets in the name of fighting misinformation.
Well, amongst them is not the white supremacist group.
Right.
So of all the 11 that was banned, because the white supremacist groups have been armed long before this conflict began. And the United Nations had been warning that this uprising of this group was dangerous, but they have been the first to step up and collect arms, right? And so Ukraine has kind of let them. But when it comes time to banning, and so when you look at the list of who's banned, it's only people who are pro-Russia, right? So that is no longer allowed. You have to choose your borders, and you must choose the Ukrainian flag. When we all know it doesn't really matter where you live in the world anymore. There are always divisions, right? You could live in Puerto Rico and there's a fraction of people who want to join the United States and there's a fraction of people who want to cede. This divide exists everywhere and certainly exists inside Ukraine, but we're not supposed to believe it if we're part of the Western world.
No, and the only reason we're able to even get some of this information out is because journalists have been able to, and there have been some obviously citizens who are reporting what's actually happening inside of Ukraine. And Zelensky is fully aware of this, and that's what the Ukrainian people have been saying. He's fully aware of what these paramilitary groups, what members of the Ukrainian military have been doing to their own citizens for years. I combed through thousands of videos this morning, and I'm going to tell you, like, it put me in a really bad mood. It made me really upset. Now, I pulled two videos, just two, and these are very, what's the word I'm looking for? Light? I mean, compared to what I saw this morning of Ukrainian citizens being taped to telephone poles and whipped and beaten by Ukrainian military. Now, these are women, children, and men with their pants yanked down.
Where did you find these? What are you talking about?
Okay, so let's just go if you want to. So anyway, the Gray Zone has been reporting, of course, that U.S. and NATO allies have been arming neo-Nazi units in Ukraine. Okay, that's the group. The Azov Brigade has for years and continue to receive arms from the United States.
Yes.
This is the Azov Battalion that there's been arguments that they have been staging false flag attacks on Ukrainian landmarks. For instance, Western media have reported that Russia's military deliberately attacked the theater in Mariupol, claiming that it was filled with civilians and marked with signs reading that it had children on its grounds. That turned out to not be the case. In fact, it looks as if this was all staged by the Ukrainian, the Azov Brigade. So as you go through and you look at what they're actually doing, here's an example of a video that the Azov Battalion, this was on Twitter, you can read about. This is the Azov Battalion in Ukraine with a group of civilian hostages in a room. This is like the eerie, this is just one example. Mm-hmm. Watch.
Okay.
If my mouse will play it. All being held against their will. And now here's more. The long. I'll link this up in the show description because it's long and it's difficult to watch. But there are thousands upon thousands of videos of Ukrainian citizens who are refusing to fight alongside of these neo-Nazis being grabbed. Many of them ethnic Russians, many of them not. Doesn't matter. It's like if you're not part of this like white supremacist group, if you're not anti-Jewish, what they say on their website, we're going to grab you, we're going to tie you to telephone poles, and we're going to whip you. This is just one example.
Oh, Clayton.
And it goes on from there.
Okay.
So these are things that people need to see, right? People need to see them because we're not going to cover them in the Western media. This is happening inside of Ukraine, and I'll link you to the thread where you can go through thousands upon thousands of these videos. I'm talking women, children, all across Ukraine at the hands of these Ukrainian paramilitary groups, okay? This is happening inside of Ukraine, but you can't talk about it. We got to ignore it. If you're in the Western media, don't even bring it up. Don't even mention it. By the way, here's what the Western media had to say about Ukraine up until February of this year. Look at this. Ukraine celebrates Nazi collaborator, bans book critical of pogroms leader. Look at all of these different resources from Politico.com to The Guardian, on and on and on. Far-right fighters from Europe fight for Ukraine. Ukraine designates national holiday to commemorate Nazi collaborators. Britons join neo-Nazi militia in Ukraine. Kiev's far-right groups refuse to disarm. Neo-Nazis and the far right are on the march in Ukraine. On and on and on. And then, of course, right after February of 2022, there's no mention of this.
Right. And the problem here is that there's so many problems, right? But we're using this tragedy to empower a government that does not have their stuff figured out and has not for a long time, right? And so now, because it's this sort of we're suffering, which Ukrainian people absolutely are, the Ukrainian government is getting this awful power grab. This weekend, Zelensky seems to have overplayed his hand a bit by criticizing Israel and saying, hey, Israel, you're not helping us enough. What you're watching is comparable to what the Nazis did in another Holocaust. Israeli leaders this weekend are saying, no, that's a line too far.
Right.
We don't compare things to the Holocaust. You don't know exactly what that means.
Right. I mean, he said in this speech, people of Israel, you saw Russian missiles. You saw Russian missiles hit Kiev. Babi Yar, which is a Holocaust memorial site.
Yes, it is.
So he says, you saw Russian missiles attack a Holocaust memorial site. They are trying to bury you twice, he said. I'm going to quote him exactly. He said, you know what kind of land it is, meaning this Holocaust memorial site in Ukraine. More than 100,000 Holocaust victims are buried there in this site. There are ancient Kiev cemeteries. There's a Jewish cemetery. Russian missiles hit there. People of Israel. Of course, reporters then were like, that doesn't sound right. People went to confirm whether or not Zelensky was telling the truth, and turns out, no, that's, again, not accurate.
It still stands.
Well, that's a shocker. Babi Yar wasn't hit. It wasn't damaged. But again, this is the kind of misinformation that is being put out in this war right now. And of course, you see these stories. You see these stories of, Holocaust sites being attacked and so forth. And then we have reports that members of the Ukrainian military have been using their own citizens as human shields, staging different attacks like at the Mariupol theater. And you have to wonder, this is why we're not taking sides here, but we want you to have this information. You make your own educated decisions about this. But if information is being kept from you, that is wrong.
Well, what's another narrative, right, that we're seeing is that Russians are disgusted with Vladimir Putin. People are turning in their passports, that Russians do not support this. That's not necessarily the case. We have video this morning of Vladimir Putin speaking to a crowded amphitheater, not amphitheater, it's a stadium, like a sports stadium of thousands of people who are, this was taken Friday. And people are waving the Russian flag. And he goes on to say, shall we let him say it?
Yeah, it's in Russian, so.
Okay.
Unless you want to translate.
I will paraphrase. Okay. This just so I don't.
I'll cut the audio then.
I don't want to speak over Vova, but.
But we could say how many people here were like forced at gunpoint to go to a stadium to listen to him, right? Who knows? Or no, they went on their own, their own. Again, like these are things we don't know.
Well, what he ends up saying here is that Russian people were being treated badly in Crimea and certain separatist areas of Ukraine, and we had to go in and rescue them. Part of that's true, though. There were separatist Russian areas that were being persecuted by Ukrainian government. So, you have to parse out. I don't know.
This is exactly, it's a good point, because this is exactly why, this is a huge reason why Ukraine is not in the United Nations right now, or not in NATO.
Or the European Union.
Or the European Union, I guess. That's what I meant to say, the European Union. They're, because of their corruption, because of their human rights abuses, they're not in the European Union.
Right.
So draw a line.
Go back to that still frame. That's great. He's kind of like, look, know what you had before.
I can't really.
Oh. What he was saying was that Crimea was in this humiliating position. And so it's kind of like we had to, right? He feels, I feel today, when you look at headlines of Western media, it's like Putin's moving on to plan B. His plan B is what? To agree to maybe almost like, what do you call it when part of your land is owned by someone else and that person has
annexed,
like an annexed part of Ukraine that would allow for certain areas to be held by Russia and there to be some kind of passageway between the areas that are not, or he's moving towards maybe less violent attacks and more negotiations. I just feel like that is incredibly ignorant of those of us who do not understand military strategy to say what Putin's plan is at this point.
No, but we know what the Western media's plan is, though. Like if you're watching, we're gonna talk about the Western media in just a moment, because I want to show you some unbelievable footage from the past.
Easement. That's the word I was looking for.
Thank you.
It's sort of like
I was going to say encroachment, but that was yeah.
No, if you have like an area of your land that can be used to pass through.
Right, like in Montana. When I lived in Montana, you're not allowed any of the waterways there. The rivers, right?
Yeah.
Those are all open. So you can walk along a river, no one has ownership of those things, right? And you can't, like, even the land goes up to the river. There's like a certain easement from the waterway to the land. You can't, someone can fish basically on your land. If you like this content, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Also, we have a membership program. For the price of a cup of coffee once a month, you can support independent journalism just by going to morninginvest.com/join.
You get access to exclusive videos, plus the ability to join and chat with us live. We really appreciate your subscription, and you are supporting independent journalism.